Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones. I am currently in the middle of a month off as you listen to this, but as I'm recording, just before I go, I'm really feeling filled up from this nourishing conversation today. And before we dive into it, I am also so excited to share with you today that we have birthed our next group journey and enrolment is officially open. I am pleased to announce that in October, I'll be guiding women more deeply in a 5-week journey with archetypal Luna, the energy of the moon, as you've likely not worked with her before. Archetypal moon is a universal symbol of the magic and mystery of life, very fitting to this episode. And she represents shining a light in the darkness, representing the feminine mystery and magic within us all, and helping us to connect back into the natural rhythms and cycles of life. When you think about the moon, she moves oceans and we don't understand how, but she doesn't shy away from that purpose of magic because we misunderstand her and we don't doubt her. We just trust that there's a magic to it all. And so you can see some of Luna's themes. She helps us to heal our self-doubt. She helps us to heal our imposter syndrome for those who long to be healers. And she helps us to heal our fears around being judged as a lunatic, all by helping us reconnect to our feminine magic and body's natural rhythms and cycles. I am deeply excited for this journey. You can find out more if it's calling you and claim your space at nicolebarton.co.uk/Luna, Luna. And I suspect this journey will be quite popular as Luna really offers a real opening to our dream of becoming a healer. So if you're wanting to join us, I'd recommend taking a look. On The Secret Witch Show today, our guest is Simone Stevens. Sim is an intuitive energy healer, Sekhem practitioner, psychic medium and practising witch who is dedicated to offering healing ceremonial sessions, treatments, ritual circles and workshops to guide the mystically and spiritually curious to find their innate magic and alignment. Sim focuses her work around connection to energy and spirit, be that of spirit realms, plants, ancient healing practices, divination tools, sound or crystals. Sim believes that supporting clients to work more closely with their intuition is the portal to profound, positive and aligned change in their lives, which is very appropriate for this episode. We explored how to embrace magic and mystery and how to learn to trust our intuition even when we are conditioned to mistrust it. We explored the common healer's journey of initiation into the mystery, which often happens via burnout and panic attacks, and how us feeling disconnected from our true selves is often the way we are called into our gifts. We explored the importance of stillness, honouring the natural rhythms and cycles of our bodies, and even navigating mistrust of others in our spirituality to reclaim our innate magic. We dived into some practical steps of tuning into our gut feelings and a deeper exploration of intuition versus ego, as well as the importance of self-compassion along the way. Let's dive in. Sim, I am so delighted to have you with us on the show. You came recommended by one of our lovely team members, so it's really beautiful to connect more deeply with a fellow witchy one, and particularly to dive into one of my favourite topics of magic and mystery and how often as secret witches or women who don't maybe know their magic or don't trust their magic or they doubt their magic, how we can mistrust that. And the alchemy that's available in that journey of learning to trust it. So I'm looking forward to diving in and welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this.
Me too, me too. And I know in the chat just before we pressed record, we were talking about how often our kind of theme, each episode of the show around a different archetypal remedy. And it feels to me like part of your medicine is very much archetypal Luna, which is the energy of the moon. And she's really a symbol of like mystery and magic and reclamation of all of that and being able to trust that for ourselves as well. And the other thing to invite you into sharing is that part of my kind of modality is that women's stories are kind of like a remedy for others. And there's a universal healing law called like yours, like me, similar us, which means essentially that we are remedies for others like us. I think we were just talking about the kind of synchronicities between some of our journeys as well. And that often quite is the way that I see the world works, in that like yours, like therefore a lot of the women who have who join me on the podcast have similar stories as well. So I waffled on quite a lot there, but the ultimate point is that my first invitation is for you to share a little bit with us about your own journey, particularly with regards to kind of leaning into the mystery and learning how to trust your own natural rhythms.
Yes. So I immediately want to start at, I suppose, like the breaking point for me, as to where I was like, I actually now have to listen to the mystery, and I have to listen to my intuition is strongly what was coming through in that mystery. And it was, I had been working in a corporate job, a high pressured like environment in PR and marketing for many, many years, too many to mention because it will give away my age. That was actually, but yeah, it was for a long time. And, I think probably just to put it out there on paper, people would have said, I was really successful, I was earning really good money, I'd built up a really good career. But I felt so disconnected from myself. And I used to describe it to people as like my soul hurt, and I couldn't really articulate it in any other way. And I think because I was probably describing it to people who weren't quite there or didn't really understand, they probably just thought, oh, she's probably a bit stressed, but it was much more than that. It was like an aching and a yearning coming from much deeper within inside me. And it just got to the point where I became very unwell. And the breaking point was that I actually started having panic attacks. I was signed off with work-related stress. And I started seeing a therapist, and I got on medication. So for me, this suddenly, from someone who'd been like a really organized, quite upbeat person, who had been really career driven, and happy. And, as I said, on paper had like all these wonderful things going on for me, like a lovely group of friends. I'd, got engaged, and all of this other stuff was going so well in my life. For me to then literally hit rock bottom like that, it was a big thing, for me. And I think, for those around me, probably quite a shock to see that happened. But it was a particular moment where I was having a panic attack in public, and this was kind of the point where I was just like, it was almost like, I suppose, something, channeled into me at that moment. At the same time, like, this is the point where this stops. This is now where, source, my intuition, my guides, whoever had been trying to communicate with me for so long had got to a point where, enough's enough. We're almost now, I describe it as like the tower card in tarot. It's like you've had the messages, but you've ignored them. So we're going to create the chaos for you now, so that you listen. It's like that shaking of somebody. So that's how it really felt. But it was that moment I just realized, like, enough's enough. This is not how my life is meant to pan out. And if I don't listen now, then the next time this happens, it could be very different. So that all sounds really dramatic. And, but I'm sure there are so many people that can resonate with having these moments where you're just like, I can't take this anymore. This doesn't feel natural to me. Living in this way doesn't feel natural to me. And I was really craving like something that did feel more mystical, but I wasn't sure what it was I was craving, which was, I suppose, again, part of that frustration. But now what I truly believe is kind of the beginning of that journey, because you then start to open your mind to what else might be available to you, because the systems that you're in are not working. So you have to become open-minded. You almost force yourself to then start looking for other answers or other ways, which is really where I then began. And I think the journey really started with me then looking at how I could heal myself, start to, in the immediate, look at ways that I could, I suppose initially fix myself, which, because I at first was like, well, I have to get back to work and, this isn't how it is. But the more I sat with that and, you know, allowed my emotions to come up naturally, I became more aware that maybe going back to that way of working wasn't the right thing. And actually, there may be other things that, might be open to me. And I think, again, it's kind of a lot of breaking down and unlearning the ways that I was already kind of committed to. I think, yeah, it's hard to articulate sometimes, but so yeah, that's kind of the point that I was like, enough's enough. I then really wanted to embrace these feelings that were coming up for me, and I knew that it was going to be difficult because, as I say, I was kind of in a situation where I was in a really well-paid job, had this really long-standing career, and I think there comes a lot of stuff around that, where you're kind of taught, aren't you, to get a good job and it has to be, 9 till 5 and blah, all of these things, these conditionings. So, suddenly what I was feeling really went against all of that. And I think this is why, for me and a lot of the work that I do, working with, being more intuitive and really listening to our intuition and how that's trying to communicate with us is really important, because our intuition does often go against all of those systems that we're in, all of those, processes that we're in, because they all favor, logic and rational thinking and data. And our intuition is the complete opposite of that. And to me, because it is the opposite of that, that's where the mystery is. You're suddenly like, whoa, well, what is this? Sorry, yeah, I'm totally going off on a tangent here.
No, I love it. I love it. And there's like already about 10 points that I'm like, oh,
Okay,
all the
you want
shiny
to
things.
narrow me back down into something.
I
But
think,
yeah,
yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, yeah, so that really, I think it really started with me obviously trying to commit to living in more of an intuitive way for myself, because I knew this, this kind of breaking point that had happened had come physically through my body in the sense of panic attacks, and being really stressed and anxious and, just constantly feeling unwell and all sorts of other things. But for me, it was that realization that this is my body, my natural rhythm of my body is now screaming at me that this is no longer the way that I can live. And probably have been other signs that I've missed. But now it's manifested physically to get that attention from me. And that's how I started to see it. And so then my journey, I actually started to, I got a bit confused. I think at the beginning, and I'm sure many people do on this path, you kind of start to try and rationalize everything in the way that you know. So I looked for a distraction, and actually the distraction for me was to train to become an aromatherapist, which we talked a little bit about earlier. I had this real calling to work with plants for my own healing. So I started, creating my own tea blends and oil blends. And then I thought, oh, amazing, I'm actually going to like learn to do this, because it became this amazing distraction from what was probably really going on. In that I was probably having this separation from the old way of living. Um, and then that's kind of where everything started to, really change, in that I then started realizing, well, if I know how I can help myself with all of this wonderful plant magic, then I could help other people. And then, from there, yeah, things just kind of went wild over the last few years in terms of the modalities that I work with now.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, that's where it all started really. It was really about me working with myself. And I think, and that's been a really important part of my journey, that everything I bring to other people is something that I've experienced myself as part of my journey. And it's really important for me that it's from lived experience.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm going to let you ask
I love
another
that.
question before I
I
keep going.
think we've just added another 10 points there. I'm loving it. There's so much synergy in our journeys. And I just want to deeply honour you first and foremost for the level of courage that you had to kind of hear those nudges, hear those calls, and be in this kind of mundane, corporate world and still be able to open to what you're being called into. Because I think it takes, from my own personal journey and from that of the women that I guide and who listen to the show and all of that, I see how much courage that does take. Like it's not an easy thing to open to.
No, it's not easy. I would absolutely say it doesn't happen overnight either. I think that's the other thing.
Yes. And we're so aligned on that, because I think we're sold this idea when we are called to be a healer, that it's just there's quick fixes out there. We just go and get a certificate and then off we go. And part of the work that I do, and that's kind of integral to the Secret Witch show, is helping people see that actually, because we can feel like a failure if we're comparing ourselves and we've got the certificate and then it's not worked out the way that we've been sold this false promise. And I think part of that coming from integrity is really making people see that, people who've walked the path, people like you, it's inspiring for them to hear, like, actually, this does take longer. This is something that we do tenderly at our soul's pace. So it's really refreshing to hear you share that as well. Yeah, but there's so much synergy in our journeys, and I'm quite autistic, so I will pull out like different themes and see where there's like juicy bits to extract. So one of the things that stood out to me was the kind of sense of breaking point. Like there always seems to be, and it was very much my own journey, interestingly, that I was in a corporate job and burned out. Mine was in terms of physical exhaustion, which yours may well have been as well. I hear you talking about panic attacks. That was also part of my journey. But there always seems to me to be some kind of like dark initiation in the calling to being a healer. And I think that's almost like what first calls us to actually pay attention to the mystery. I'm wondering what you feel about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have had this same conversation with many people in the healing space, but also I suppose in different modalities, how sometimes that can, I suppose the way that dark calling comes through, it can be quite similar. So I lots of people who have had similar experiences to us, I suppose, experience burnout in the corporate world is how I would, I suppose, summarize it. And that's then kind of like the point that they, have this kind of realization. And it's really interesting because I then spoke to a few months ago, someone who's a seasoned medium, and they had this idea that most good mediums have had a near-death experience. And I was like, oh, but that's actually really unusual. Those experiences are probably few and far between. And it was just an interesting conversation to have with her because that was her experience. She said, oh, well, I had one. Lots of people I know in this space have had one. So I was like, that's really interesting because, I'm not saying that's a blanket response for everything, but it does seem that there's almost like these points of where you have to make those like sliding door decisions about
Mm,
which way you're going to go with it. So yeah, so
yeah,
I think
I love
it's
that.
yeah, it definitely to me feels like, and again, when you're talking about integrity,
Mm,
um, I'm not saying it's important that people have these like dark
mm,
times, but I think, particularly when I was started looking for healers, I wanted to know that they really understood me
mm,
and that they did have, similar experiences or the skills to understand me with empathy and,
mm.
and support me in that way. So, I think people having life experience is actually, yeah, is probably what I'm saying is like kind
Yeah,
of a lot as
I
well.
think there's also something that I loved that you said around like healing ourselves first. And when I share this, I'm just caveating that with like we can never be fully healed.
Of course. Yeah, yeah. Of
but
course.
but I think there's a real beauty in us having embodied and what you shared around. I fully agree with what you shared around like we have to heal ourselves and have that experience to go through to reclaim our gifts. I would say our gifts are in our wounds.
Yes.
And so we always like, have to journey into that darkness, which I guess you could also describe as like the mystery,
Yeah.
ultimately, like the kind of place where we're kind of dragged into often when we
Yeah.
first come into the path, kind of drags us, calls us down into the mystery, often almost like unconsciously. And I guess part of the work that I'm in, and I wonder how you feel about this, I think you said something that made me think of this, is almost like at the time where we're in that first initiation and we start to hear the call, we're kind of in like an unconscious initiation. And I guess the work that I do helps women to start to make that conscious so that we can then work with it more intentionally to harness the mystery, harness the magic, which is ultimately what I'm hearing you say you did. but
Yeah.
it's almost
Yeah.
like there's almost like a conscious versus unconscious
Yes,
portal
absolutely.
that I'm hearing. And I wonder if you've got anything to say to that. I don't know if that's a particular question. I'm good at this. I'll like make a statement and then not have a question to go with it.
No, no, I would agree. I think there has to be like work done consciously and subconsciously. That's I think how I described it earlier. To me, it's like that unlearning of what
Mm,
comes in the subconscious and
yeah.
like changing the thoughts and the patterns in that sense.
Mm,
Um, and I think with a lot of the work that I do, I suppose, yeah, for me, a lot of those that come and work with me, it probably does feel more in the subconscious or
mm,
in their energetic bodies that we're
mm,
unraveling things or removing or unblocking things or
mm,
connecting with energies that are the other side or in other
mm.
realms, which again, for me, doesn't always work necessarily in the conscious world. So, yeah, but I do think there's this lovely or healthy way of working with them both in your healing
Mm,
process. And I
mm,
think, and I was actually reading something the other day about, the conscious being like, imagining that as our physical body and the unconscious as, our energies and what's maybe going on that we don't see, but we can't ignore one without the other. They do have to work together because even though we're a human, we're also a spirit. And so
yes.
both of those systems do have to work together.
I
But
love
it
that.
may be that at points you're focusing on your physical body more, the
Mm,
conscious changes. And then you might go through a period of where you work with, the energies around you or the heat, the subconscious.
mm, I love
I
that.
think,
The way I've described that before is almost like a co-creation between spirit and soul. Like I see
yeah,
soul as like the body and spirit as kind of like the greater, the universal intelligence,
yeah,
or spirit,
yeah.
whatever you want to, whatever word you want to use it. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm. I was also really interested in what you said around the kind of like feeling this split between the mundane and the kind of corporate, and then this part of you that was like feeling really disconnected. I love how you described it as like soul hurts, like this aching, this yearning for something more. Um, and then that kind of speaks to me as like this almost like the first nudge of like there's some kind of
Mm,
deeper mystery, deeper magic, deeper purpose here that wants to be paid attention to. And I was hearing in it this sense of like on one hand, there's like this logical kind of world where we've learned to control, we've learned to show up and kind of have it together, if you like. I
Yeah.
could say like line all our ducks up in a row. And then this part of you that was called to something that was really unknown, aka the mystery and the magic. And I'm wondering how you kind of navigated that. I heard you talk about kind of opening your mind, which I think again can almost like, it's almost like when we hit that rock bottom place, it's the only place to go. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of women will kind of come to that point and it's like, okay, well, I'm literally forced into kind of looking here now.
Yeah. Looking for an alternative in
Mm,
something. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so I think because I kind of hit that rock bottom place, and I tried, I suppose, for a while, the conventional ways, which,
Mm,
I think I mentioned, like therapy, medication, you know, I was doing all of the things that, you're told to do, mindfulness apps, all of these
mm,
things. And I was like, yes, some of it was really working for me and some of it just wasn't resonating, and
mm,
I am a great believer that, everything has its place and is very different for each of us,
mm,
and we'll come at it very differently. But I just wasn't feeling, particularly, I suppose, being on medication,
mm,
that really didn't feel natural to me at the time. I had quite
mm,
a lot of resistance to it again, which felt unusual because I hadn't before.
mhm,
Um, and so that really sort of sent me into, I suppose, like a little journey on looking at other ways that I could maybe not necessarily at first alternative, but I would say more complementary ways of
mm,
working with um, herbs and things, like I said, and oils and plants to sort of support stress and anxiety
mm,
um, and panic attacks and that feeling of exhaustion as
mm,
well, like the physical exhaustion that I was feeling. And then that sort of, yeah, my curiosity really did take me on a journey then because I started to really open up my mind even more. And I was just like, wow, there's all these other things that I could be trying. Why don't I just give them a go? So I suddenly was really, I suppose the mystery really got hold of me for a long time. And
mm.
I became like this curious child again, where I was like in a slightly boundary trying sort of all sorts of things because I thought, well, why not? Again, it was almost like it's worth a go, isn't it? It's worth a try.
Mm,
And if other people have tried it and they've had great experiences, I get that it's not always for me. I think I was really good at being not blindsided by, that everything is going to work wonders and be a quick fix. So that
mm,
did really take me down a journey with, things like medicines,
mhm,
microdosing, starting to work with um, energy healing,
mm,
shamanic healing. I started to work, for probably a good 2 years, really working with crystals on myself every day,
mm, mm.
gridding myself when I was getting home and things. And I just became like this little child in this mystery world. And it
Love
really did
that.
actually
It's,
make me feel like a kid again. And
I love
it
that
was
so much.
exciting.
The reason why I love that so much is because the way I work in terms of archetypal remedies, what tends to happen is women will be born into the world as a particular constitutional remedy. And the remedy that I see common for healers is the remedy of phosphorus, archetypal phosphorus. Now, phosphorus is what's on the end of a match. They're very fiery, but they're also very sensitive because you think of a match
Yeah.
striking. And they're very open and curious. And what I'm hearing in that is like almost like this return to this like
Mm.
beautiful phosphoric, like open, curious, wide-eyed, like sensitive little girl
Oh,
who was like, oh my God, there's a whole apothecary
yeah.
here. Like, let's go explore.
Yeah, and that is totally what happened. And it really took me on this lovely nostalgic journey with, you know, having these like lovely mystical feelings as a kid, because I really was that kid who, and I know so many of us do, but loved making potions. I absolutely was
Mm,
convinced I'd met fairies in the garden,
mm,
and I had, as a kid, I had been very sensitive to energy. I
Mm,
could see spirits. I had
mm,
described them. I'd seen angels. I'd, had all of these experiences, which is probably slightly different, but had been quite suppressed by my family.
mm,
Um, and, probably came up again when I was on this journey. But it really took me back to those times. And I just
mm,
thought, wow, I kind of have forgotten about this magic that I knew of when I was
mm,
young. And um, it was almost like, then I got a bit like, frustrated and a bit angry, like, well, I've missed this, and why was this taken away from me? This is
mm,
like such a beautiful way of living, and it's available to all of us.
mm.
Yeah, it's taken away.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, again, I suppose the ups and downs with being open is that you have these lovely, beautiful times where you're just so in it. And then again, I suppose the reality of what's happened or the trauma you may have been in then brings it back to like this frustration and things. So,
Mm,
it's very up and down. But
mm,
yeah, I think, you start to learn that that's actually all part of, I suppose the other point of your question at the beginning, that it is part of these natural rhythms. And I think,
mm,
you know, for many of us actually having maybe that rock bottom moment and coming back up the spiral and
mm.
unlearning things, re-remembering things is part of that, is actually part of our natural rhythm as becoming.
Yeah, I love that. And I think
Yeah.
it really illuminates the importance of healing our inner healer as well. But
Yeah.
I think what the language I would use to describe what you're describing is almost like there's going to be shadow and gold to be reclaimed in this journey.
Absolutely.
And I guess we can only really reclaim that by being open to the mystery, which it sounds like you are talking to there, is like this sense
Yes.
of like being open. It's almost like we've gone through life as sensitive ones. We've had to almost like close our heart to fit into this controlled, logical, mundane world. And then suddenly we hit a point where we're just no longer available for that. Like
Yeah.
whether we think it or not, like it's just eventually we hit that point of like, okay, this is not who I came here to be. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
just we just open our heart again. It's like
Yeah.
we've kind of clouded it over, and then suddenly what made me, I got goosebumps actually when you were talking, was like this sense of like just this reclamation of the lost part of your soul that was always meant to be who you are
Mm,
now.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, that is really how I felt. Like I was reclaiming parts of me that I had not necessarily lost, just,
Mm.
I mean, and there probably are parts of my soul that I have lost. That's the whole other conversation. Um, uh, that I just forgotten about, that were just
Mm.
so buried in me that it was
Yes.
like, you know, uh, meeting them again. And,
Mm.
which, yeah, actually, God, it makes me feel quite emotional because
Mm.
it's just so beautiful. And I think that's how I've then had to become, as part of like, I suppose the embracing the mystery of the journey, is then becoming really present with that and not, as I said, like staying in that frustration and anger, like, well, why did I forget about this part of me? And why have I been
Mm.
told that I have to do things that way? And like, not, because I think we can get really
Yes.
slated on being sad and angry about
Mhm.
what can feel like has been taken away from us, and actually just being
Mm.
really present in what's happening right now and how beautiful that is, and
Mm.
trusting that it's coming back to you now for a really, really magical and important reason. I think,
I love
yeah,
that.
that for me, then that opening up to the being present
Mm.
it was another real key part of that
Ooh.
journey.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk more about that. One of the things before we do, actually, that just really struck me about what you said, and I think this is so important because a lot of the quick fix pieces work on the assumption that we're kind of broken and we need fixing, which we talked a little bit too. One of the things that feels the most healing thing for me is the kind of almost like the loving back of these parts of our souls that have been
Mm,
clouded over almost. Like we haven't, I agree with you, like we haven't lost them. They're always there, but it can feel like they've been lost
Yeah.
in many ways. But I think love is the one thing that helps us. The more we can love ourselves and be open to the mystery and the magic, that feels to me like to be the most healing thing. Um, I've forgotten where I was going to go with that now. Oh, you said about what did you say? What was the last part that you said? Oh, the presence piece. Yeah, that makes me think about, I guess, like the coming more to the piece about trusting our natural rhythms and like tuning into our body and becoming more present that way. And I'm wondering if you can speak to this piece about like how you began to become more present and to start to trust those kind of natural rhythms of your body that were calling you into the mystery.
Yeah, no. So I think, the fact that I'd had that sort of rock bottom where my body had physically alerted me to
Mm.
what was happening really gave me kind of this really striking message that, you know, that the body is so powerful that, our natural rhythms, I suppose I probably would have said, oh, natural rhythms to me is like, oh, well, I know when my period's going to be. And,
Mm.
it's kind of very vague, but I was like, actually, there's so much more to how my body is working naturally and those rhythms and how they might be connected to, looking at nature or looking at, the way things work. And I think for me, it was um carving out time for stillness
Mm.
became really important, particularly because I've been suffering with like anxiety and stress, and I had avoided sitting with myself because there was so much going on in my mind that I'd obviously been distracting it with work and all sorts of other things, that
Mm.
actually for me being still for a long time became, well, not became, it was really difficult. And I
Mm.
think, that is part of our natural rhythm. Stillness, rest, retreat is part of the process of healing, but also our, day to day looking after ourselves,
Mm.
and that you see play out in natural rhythms of everything, our cycle, nature. There's always a still period where, everything is,
Mm.
not fertile or, so I was just like, suddenly that became really illuminated to me that, I needed to be still. I needed to be in the stillness to be able to hear my own natural rhythms, to hear my intuition,
Mm.
to pick up on, you know, the senses in my physical body, but also energetically as well. Like,
Mm.
what was I connecting with my mind and really listening to what was going on. Um, so yeah, I think an honoring then what I was picking up on and not, sort of ignoring it. So
Mm.
I think again, that's the difference. It's one, and I say this a lot with people who work with me for, getting to learn their intuition. It's one thing to learn to
Mm.
hear your intuition or to sit with yourself, but it's another to act on it. And that's where
Mm.
the real change happens. So for a long time it was about learning to be still, so
Mm.
learning to sit in nature or go for a walk or get better at meditating, trying all of the things, well, being really curious about what stillness and naturally coming into my own rhythm could look like. Um, and then once I found it and what works for me, it was then, the act of listening. What is the natural rhythm telling me?
Mm.
And how's that being communicated with me? Is it in my physical body? Is it coming through, one of my clairs or one of my guides, and I suppose as I went on that journey with stillness, I then opened up to all of those things as well, what
Mm.
took me more, I suppose, on the spiritual direction of my healing path. So, but yeah,
Mm.
for me, I think the getting comfortable in the stillness was a big part of that coming
Mm.
into the natural rhythms.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And also, I can really feel the kind of challenge of that for when we're in that
Mm.
kind of anxiety kind of place as well. And I'm thinking back to my own journey where I've had the same experience. I remember going to a retreat in Thailand once, or a yoga training, and just like going from that fast pace into like, so, I was in London traveling around and then just went to this island. It's like, oh, this is like the only thing to do here is to just be and to just be still. And I remember the resistance that I had to it. And yet now, this is something that I create space for as I'm thinking, I have August off where I really be in
Mm.
that and kind of weave it into my life as well, of course. But yeah, I completely hear you on that. And when you were speaking about the natural rhythms, that was very much reminding me of almost like the season of winter. It's like that. Again, the
Yeah.
darkness, we'll go back to the
Yeah.
darkness of the mystery. It's like we kind of forget that the darkness has a gift to it. The winter has a gift to it. Because we're so used to being in summer, go, go, go season.
Mhm.
And that's really what stood out to me as you were speaking there about almost like the seasons and the rhythms. It's like this
Yeah.
need to winter.
And autumn and winter actually probably my favourite.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, me too. Season of
And
roots.
people always say, why would you like the cold, dark months? I'm like, I don't know. Just like that's when I feel most alive, strangely.
Yes,
But yeah, yeah,
I
I
love
think
that.
yeah, it's important.
Yeah, I love that so much. There's somewhere else that I wanted to go, and I'm just trying to remember where it was. Um, there's a piece about one of the pieces where we're talking about how it can be quite terrifying for women to begin to trust that magic, and even just to step into creating space for
Mm.
stillness. I think can be. I loved what you said, by the way, about taking action and honoring our intuition. But I think also it's almost like there's two phases to that. There's like the hearing of it, I was hearing you saying, and then
Yeah.
also the honoring of it. And I think even just the hearing of it for some women can be really, really challenging and really scary,
Mm.
particularly as well. Just going back to something you shared right at the beginning, was when our family can kind of doubt the mystery and the magic. So, like, we might have an opening and be like, "Oh, okay," I start to trust it, but then, like, we're layered over with like losing approval and being judged for actually kind of
Yeah.
tuning into that. And I'm wondering if there's anything there to explore.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. It's been that's been a little journey in itself for me, as I mentioned earlier, because I knew I had this connection to spirit when I was a child. And
Mm.
it kind of been, I would say, joked about a lot in my family over the
Mm.
years. Oh, remember when Sim thought she had a imaginary friend, but it might have been a ghost. And I used to say, to me, they were really real people, and
Mm.
I had conversations with them. They came with me to places. I would receive things from them, and I think, and I was totally open to it. Obviously, I was a small kid. My parents, however, new parents, they were quite young,
Mm.
you know, I think they were afraid. They were afraid of what it
Mm.
was.
Mm.
So they obviously tried to play it down at the time because they didn't know how to deal with it. And I totally understand that now. But I think when I started to reconnect to that ability on my
Mm.
journey, and I suddenly started to have spirit come to me again. Well, at first I was terrified. I was
Mm.
really fearful because, obviously it was bringing back up those old triggers from when I was a kid that this
Mhm.
isn't real, this is your imagination.
Mhm.
But also I've had years since then of, society telling you that ghosts don't exist, it's rubbish, it's all dark and evil and all of these things as well.
Mm.
So suddenly I found myself in this situation where I was like, oh God, this journey is like a completely different
Mm.
direction. So for a long time I really did wrestle with that. And I think that whole idea of like, and again really plays into, I suppose, that idea of the witch wound as well, like
Mm.
really awakening to ourselves and claiming these abilities, this power, and struggling with that fear.
Mm.
So I think I was dealing with that very much as part of that layer. But it got to the point, and again, probably like my rock bottom moment, where I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was almost like I had spirits following me around again, almost being like, well, we can see you as a beacon of light to deliver for us. So we need you to pay attention. And because I didn't know how to work with them, I was just like, oh, what's going on? So, and it got to a point where this is silly. And then I just had to, and it feels so strange now because it feels so natural to me now. But
Yeah,
I
I was
really,
thinking that as well.
yeah, I had to sit down and say to my husband, I've been seeing dead people.
Yeah.
And I'm so lucky because he actually is very open-minded and has been on this journey with me, because I'm definitely not the same person he met in that sense. And he was really, really chill about it and was like, okay, well, you kind of knew this was going to happen, didn't you? And I was like, what? So, it was quite surprising. And then as part of, I suppose, like getting over the fear was having the conversation with my parents and, saying, well, do you remember when I was a child, this happened? And, everyone used to joke about it. And, well, actually it's happening to me again. And I totally believe in it and I'm going to pursue it. And honestly, I was just blown away by how supportive they were. And, my mum and dad are separated now. So it was 2 conversations to have. But, and the thing that really, really, and it still makes me like, it makes me want to cry thinking about it now. But the thing that actually really got me was that they both were so apologetic about how they had dismissed it for me as a child, and that they could see that maybe that wasn't the right way to do it, but they were young and they didn't understand it themselves and they were scared. And that just, to me, that was enough. Like, that was more than enough. That wasn't what I was expecting. And, and both now are so supportive of how I work. It's literally been so liberating in that way that, I didn't then have to be like hiding who I am, because even though I had gone, well, I'm going to do it. It's really brave. I'm going to tell my parents, my husband, and, start to tell my friends and family that, my path is now taking me down this route. That they've all just got behind it, and that they're
so beautiful,
and that they're fascinated by it, and they want to hear about it, and they don't take the mickey. And and I know that's not the situation for everybody, so I'm so grateful. And it's obviously made things easier, but I think that was, for me, probably one of the biggest fears to overcome, not just for myself, because of course, like you said, like that whole, am I going mad? No, I'm not going mad. There's like literally someone trying to talk to me that's definitely not here. And and then getting over that fear myself, and then taking it to the people that I love, and of course I wasn't really looking for validation or
and I
acceptance.
think
It was more part of me getting over the trauma maybe of
yes,
being dismissed as a child.
that's a really important point, because I love the medicine that you just served there, and it really does feel like medicine, and it feels like lunar medicine, interestingly. Which, by the way, I've realised you've got a sign behind you saying "Moon Child."
Well, yeah,
I was like, of course,
yeah.
that's literally what you are. But it's like there's just this one of the things that Luna as an archetypal remedy can kind of have as her wounding is this sense of other people judging her as a lunatic. And so it really feels like what you're describing there is like that perfect alchemy of Luna. And like just what you created in that is so beautiful and so inspiring, I think, to many women who are thinking, okay, well, maybe I can trust my wisdom, but like, how do I do that and share that with other people? And I think what I was hearing in what you shared was like this lack of almost like needing validation shows that you had kind of arrived at a place where you had loved and accepted and welcomed this magical part of you. And I think when we get to that place and do the inner work to get to that place, almost like the world meets us there.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. And but like you say, it's doing the work, and that isn't easy always, It has its ups and downs. And as I said earlier, it doesn't happen overnight,
Mm,
I
mm,
think I really, really, particularly the connection I have with spirit, really wrestled with that for probably well over a year, 18 months before I fully sort of
mm,
embraced it and had those conversations, and then started to like, okay, now it's out there, how am I going to work to develop this? Because now I want to do it with integrity, and I want to make sure that I'm doing this from a place of love and and trust. So yeah,
mm.
it's all, and it's always ongoing, but
Mm.
all of it is, but yeah, it always is.
I
The
love that.
spirit surprised me all of the time.
Mm, I love that. I love that. I'm wondering if there's any kind of like practical advice that you've got for people who are maybe just starting to embrace the mystery, the magic, trusting that. Is there anything practical? I'm thinking in terms of
Yeah.
like, everybody's obviously different and has different gifts. So it's probably challenging in some ways, but I'm thinking like, synchronicities and, trusting our guides and opening to that kind of, that way of
Yeah.
being.
I think, and this was a great point, because I think a lot of this for me really does come back to this sense of being more intuitive.
Mm,
And, once we start to be more intuitive, we are then
mm,
open to maybe connecting with our guides, or we might be open to seeing the synchronicities of things in
mhm,
the world. But there's almost like for me, and a lot of the people that I work with in that way, there's almost like, yeah, that step before it where we have to get over this. Okay, well, if I'm going to be more intuitive, like where do I start? And for me, our intuition is almost a bit like a muscle. We have to,
mhm,
because for so many of us, we have kind of, it's been suppressed or switched off
mhm,
for quite a long time. It's, you know, it's going back in, starting to connect and building that muscle, building that
mhm,
trust. And
mm,
I think the important thing to remember is our intuition is us. So you're
mm,
building that trust with yourself.
mm,
And so for me, one of the simplest things I always get people to start doing with is, just listening to their gut feelings
mm, mm,
and just really acknowledging them, and just slowly starting to see what direction they're taking them in, and it could be as simple as something like, what do I want for dinner?
mm,
You know,
mm,
you might have something particular planned, but actually, if you then listen to your intuition and it gives you something else, is it because my body's craving that because it nutritionally needs it, or my
mm,
intuition's telling me that you might need it for some reason? And, like something really simple, or, it could be you've been invited to something and
mhm,
in your gut, you're feeling like, I just don't really want to go. And is
mm,
that because your intuition's telling you that if you go, you're, you know, draining your energy? Maybe it's a place that you don't find enjoyable. You're going out of obligation, all of those other things.
mm,
So I think, just tuning into that gut feeling is a really
mm,
gentle way to start. And as I say, you can start by doing some sort of like small things and then build
yeah.
up to having I love this exercise that I've done with a few clients where it's like have a whole day where it's just led by your intuition.
I love
And then
that.
people come back and they're like, I've had the best day ever. I did all these things that like filled my cup. I feel really happy. I'm like, well, your whole life could be like that when we just,
Mm,
build that trust again. But again, I think it's the action that is
mm,
the really courageous part of the work.
mm,
It takes a while to kind of figure out the cues that maybe your intuition slash ego voice has.
mm,
But once you then figure that out, and then you start to maybe feel some of those deeper callings,
mm,
it really is the acting on it that is the bit that
mm.
of course, we will all struggle with, because, as I said earlier, a lot of that really goes against
Yeah.
a lot of what we're told we should
Yes.
be doing.
And I think you said something along the lines of earlier, us being committed unconsciously to the opposite of our intuition, something along those lines. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, yeah.
that's really interesting when it comes to like taking action. And I think there's also something you said in here that's really juicy, which was almost like differentiating. I think this is like almost like intuition deep, what I'm just about to say, rather than like the basics of intuition.
Yeah.
But you talked about discerning between intuition and what's true versus what's ego. And I was just contemplating that as you were talking about like starting to tune into our intuition, because something I guide women into in the work that I do is almost like we've been conditioned in many ways as well by a lot of healing work to just go in and trust what our body is showing us. And that's not to say that we shouldn't, because absolutely we need to hear and honor our body. But I
Mm.
think there's also almost like a deepening with intuition where we learn, okay, which part of this is actually like my body's still showing me, but what's showing me is something that's fear based, that's
Yeah.
actually not true. And I think there's a whole journey, even
Oh,
just to be aware of with that, like,
yeah.
and not when you're first beginning, like
No, yeah,
first
no, of
beginning, like
course.
welcome all the wounds, like that's
Yeah.
still important.
Yeah.
And there's like a deeper level as well. And I'm wondering if that's what you're talking to by ego.
Yes, absolutely. And you're totally right. It's not something necessarily I would dive into with in my work at the beginning, because I think, getting to
Mm,
know it, your intuition, and just, even bringing that awareness back to it
mhm,
at first
mhm,
is really important. But yeah, as you deepen that relationship, that trust with yourself
mm,
again in that space, it's then, I suppose sometimes describe it as like we have this intuitive voice, and
mm,
we have our ego voice. And I totally believe that we have a place for ego.
mm,
It's not
mm.
something that we should get rid of. I know lots of
No.
people feel like that, but
Mm.
I think it does have its place. It's there in many ways to keep us safe and
Yeah,
secure.
it has. I
So
always say it has information in it.
it
It's
does
like,
have
mm,
information, but
mm,
I think that because of the way, we've talked about that we are in these kind of systems and the ways that we've been told things, our ego, for me, sometimes tends to be this more like shouty voice that we might get.
mm,
It
mhm.
has more of an abruption, like, oh, you
Yeah.
can't possibly do that. Whereas
Mm.
your intuition really comes through with a softness.
Yes. Yeah.
And, and that's why sometimes we don't hear it first, because
Mm.
our ego wants to get in there quickly and say,
Mm.
"Oh, you can't possibly change your life." And our
Mm.
intuition is just whispering
Yes.
below that. And I think that in itself then becomes, a learning. And,
Mm.
and in no way saying I'm the oracle of that. I still have to decipher through what is
Mhm.
my ego and intuition all the time. And
Yeah.
something you're always learning, but that's how I've like learned in my process, that it can feel slightly different in those voices.
Mm. I think it's really, you've beautifully summed up how I see it. It's like there's almost like a feeling, a tangible feeling in the
Yeah.
body, in the difference that we're able to like discern. And I really do think if when we're first starting to tune back into our intuition, like we're just hearing all of it is like really, really important. Even honoring some of the pieces that are coming from fear and wounding or ego, like that in itself is still part of the journey of
Oh,
connecting to our
absolutely. Yeah,
intuition.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
loved how you discern that, and I just sort of make a really good kind of exploration, because I think there's like a depth to and a nuance
Yeah.
to it as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Well, I'm just conscious that we're running over time, I think.
Ooh.
So that feels like a really gorgeous place to complete. It could go on talking forever because it's like loads of notes I've got here
Oh, I
about
know.
all sorts. But is there anything else that you'd like to share before we do complete? And then I'll invite you as well to share more about where people can find you.
I think the only other thing I would share, and I know I've said this, but I think I I will say it again, because I really wish someone had said this to me at the
Mm,
beginning, is, you know, throughout the whole process of your own healing journey or becoming a healer, um, just be really kind to yourself and have self-compassion, and know that there are going to be ups and downs with it, and it is not all love and light all of the time. And I'm sure most people do understand that, but I think, again, over the years I've worked with people who, again, it's almost like it's a given and it should just happen. Particularly when we talked about intuition, it's like someone mentions intuition and it's like, oh, well, you should just be intuitive now. It's not the case. And I think, but just having that self-compassion and knowing it's not all going to change overnight is a massive part of it. And that, just be kind to yourself as you're doing it, because
I love that.
what we're doing is amazing work for ourselves and for our communities that will ripple out to, and it really has to come from a place of loving yourself. So that's me done.
Oh, I have loved this conversation. Thank you so much. I would love to know, well, we'll put it in the show notes, but I'd love for you to share where people can find you and if you've got anything coming up that you want to share with them.
Yes. So you can find me on my website or Instagram, which is Senses by Sim. And people can work with me on a one-to-one basis through readings or healings. And I have my own studio in Brighton where people can come in person. And I do also have the Intuition Initiation 4-week course starting in August. So this will be the third time I've run this. And it's a really brilliant way, if you are kind of new to this idea of working with your intuition, to step into it in a really safe container, where each week we have kind of like small little things to work on, support each other in a WhatsApp group. It's just a really beautiful way to start that journey. If that's been calling to you. So
that's so beautiful. We'll pop all of the links to that in the show notes. But thank you so much. It's been such a gorgeous conversation, and just like
I really enjoyed it.
me too. It's just been such a gorgeous, it feels very lunar.
It does.
I love that you've got the mean child. I know. I was like, of course.
I don't to you. I'm so used to seeing it, I just forget it's there now. So funny.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I absolutely loved that episode with Sim. Here are my takeaways. For those who long to be healers, embracing magic and mystery is vital, though we can often have wounding and fear around trusting our intuition that wants to be healed for ourselves first. The mundane world can lead us sensitive souls to manifest symptoms of burnout and panic attacks, which can feel like rock bottom, even when we look like we've got it all together. These are actually a sign of deeper calls into our intuition and magical healing gifts. Often these messy, dark portals of mystery are catalysts for our deeper purpose and a required part of the path. It can be hard to open when we feel like this, and it's often in the moment where we think there's no other choice that intuition kicks in. Staying curious helps us open more fully to trusting our intuition, begin to hear our body and open to our magic. It often requires us to unlearn years of conditioning. Practicing stillness and carving out time for self-illumination are essential to help us tune into our natural rhythms and intuition. And this can be cultivated with a practice Sim shares regarding listening to our gut feelings to build our intuitive muscle. The more we heal self-doubt of our magic and intuition, the more others will meet us in that. It can be a common fear for the secret witch to think that others will judge her as a lunatic, but when we truly welcome our own intuition and magic, others can too. It's important to hear our intuition, and it's taking aligned action that actually heals. Each time we act on synchronicities or inner nudges, we are building trust in our intuitive voice. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.